Today, we'll be talking about unlocking the tapped ecosystem on Indian trucking. And what would it be when we say the unlocked capacity of trucking? So a little background about Indian trucking for those of you who don't know about our ecosystem. So in India, essentially, we move close to 8 million trucks. That's the ecosystem we have. Predominantly, most of this moves with single fleet owner drivers. Now, when we say single fleet owner drivers, these are drivers who themselves are the owners and who drive their own truck. So 80% of this ecosystem consists of this genre of people. And under the entire ecosystem, the background of Indian trucking, you need to understand how big it is, simply because the diaspora and the size of our country essentially makes it very, very challenging given the different kinds of terrains. So we essentially have the global SIPL standards, which is the first mile, mid-mile, and last mile deliveries, and long-haul deliveries as well. But in this whole ecosystem, you have a variety of type of vehicles. And what do I mean by that is you have vehicles that are containers, that are open tops, that are flatbeds. And essentially, you'll find in the Indian ecosystem especially, even every from pin to plane, different kinds of modified vehicles, very less standardization. And hence, there's a lot of customization that's always been there for many years. Why is it trapped? Essentially, India's movement and how our entire ecosystem again consists is that if you look at it as a map of India, we have the north and the western zones typically that are the manufacturing hubs of the country. So any kind of movement that moves, or majority of the movement that you would say, moves from the west and the northern corridor of India. And across that, you even have most of the movement that goes from the north and the west towards the east and the south. So it's flowing downwards. Now, every time that happens, we don't get enough loads back. So for example, if a truck has to move from the north of India to the south of India, to go back from the south to the west or the south to the north, there aren't enough loads. And so what happens in those situations is there's this, so to speak, tussle for loads, trucks, etc. And this complete indiscipline, so to speak, disbalance of the ecosystem is what creates a lot of tension, so to speak, in the ecosystem. So when we say we're trying to unlock your transportation capacity and even make it better, what are the kinds of solutions around it, right? When we said, okay, this is the, so to speak, background, this is where we are, and it's super complicated, what can be done to unlock these things in the best way possible? So the number one thing that works very, very well is reverse loads understanding. So when we say reverse loads understanding, typically it's essentially being able to say that, okay, for example, you have a truck that moves from Mumbai to Chennai, about 1,500 kilometers. This freight typically for a 20-tonner vehicle would be in the range of ₹1 lakh. Now, for this vehicle to go back, it can't go back empty. So it needs to work with a reverse load partner. And that's where companies can take advantage of their position in the manufacturing hubs and then build accordingly factories in the kind of regions where these kind of loads can be taken back at a much cheaper cost. So again, to come back to the Chennai example, you have Chennai to Mumbai going at almost half the price, which is about 50,000 rupees. And that can be a huge opportunity for manufacturers to understand that if they place their factories or their, so to speak, loads in those areas to be imported or exported, that's the way they could reduce logistics cost. The other thing is also understanding what kind of vehicles to put. So when we say vehicles, like I said, there are multiple kinds of vehicles. And for example, how you design the truck, if you can work with your logistics partner, you can essentially reduce cost phenomenally lower simply by customizing that truck to suit your movement. Let's say, for example, you have, you're making washing powder. Now, the type of vehicle you need will be relatively smaller in size because the washing powder is heavier as a load, and not something on the lines of, let's say, a tank, which is a higher dimension and a lighter load. So for those, you need to customize and build your trucks to be bigger, and at least with your logistics supply partner, built to suit that. But what happens in the ecosystem is that typically people understand this and then create those kind of trucks for their manufacturing purposes or supply chain purposes, but they don't account for the reverse loads that are coming back. And now it's becoming more and more apparent for companies to understand that, hey, okay, for example, if I'm moving cars from, let's say, Delhi to Chennai again, and this time, can I take back, not cars, but can I take back scooters? So you design the truck in a way that can do cars and scooters both ways. So you build for customizing on both sides and then optimize your reverse loads. Now, to do that, of course, I'll be entering into what you need to do to make sure that that happens. But essentially, a good example of this from a reverse point of view is the car and the scooter example. Another thing you could also do is look at combined loads. So, for example, again, let's take the powder. You have washing powder and you have maybe a tank. So can those companies in the same vicinity, in the same industrial area, combine their cargo together? For example, put washing powder in the tank and then transport it all together, right? And so when you do that, you essentially save on logistics cost phenomenally lower. And why that helps is because obviously the truck is anyways going to go to that direction. Anyways, that material would have gone. In this case, you can actually keep the material safeguarded and the tank becomes clean because of the washing powder. And this is actually a real live example that has happened in India with companies here. So if you're smart, you can actually optimize that way. And a very big space that I think in India is now growing is the multimodal, so to speak, operation and logistics. And what do I mean by that is we have, if you were to look at how logistics works, air cargo is the most expensive, right? Then you have road, then you have rail, and then the least expensive is waterways. So with the Indian ecosystem and of course globally as well, we're now seeing this multimodal movement of cargo where people will try to do long distances in the ship and then the mid-mile, so to speak, by rail, and then the last mile by truck. And so if you can combine that correctly, you can actually unlock a lot of the hidden, so to speak, gaps in the ecosystem. And so this is a hybrid model a lot of companies have been playing around with. You also have models in India, which is quite innovative, where you're actually putting the truck on the railway and then taking it from point A to point B. So a few of these, so to speak, secrets of the ecosystem can be unlocked. Another way, which I also am a very big fan of, is using technology. So through, let's say, freight aggregation or transparency of loads, can you create a network of companies, somebody who's manufacturing soaps, somebody who's manufacturing furniture, can they both work together to arrange reverse loads with each other if they talk to each other more often? Can they optimize through creating an ecosystem of this visibility of, so to speak, loads, and then make sure that everybody has a win-win situation? The big challenge for truckers, and of course, because we have a majority of our ecosystem as single fleet owners, the big challenge for truckers is not being able to find the right loads at the right time. So asset utilization is very, very bad in India, not only because of the ecosystem in terms of our infrastructure, but also because of the fact that we don't have access to data very easily. And so there are quite a few middlemen. And I believe that if, for example, if we had to all just come onto one platform and then share this information freely, of course, there are a lot of data issues, etc. But if that information goes out correctly and is non-compete, etc., you can actually create a much lower, so to speak, cost input, and at the same time create higher levels of efficiency. So these are, again, a third chapter in which you could reduce your cost, improve efficiency, and also unlock this untapped potential. And finally, for those of you who aren't very familiar with the ecosystem, is that always try and see if we can move from smaller vehicles, which was earlier the 9-tonner trucks, to moving to 16-tonner trucks, to moving to 24 and then 40-ton trucks. So the larger the trucks you go and the heavier they are, essentially your cost per kilometer comes down. So it's in the best interest for companies and the management of companies to understand that if they can try and reduce the number of trucks, but increase the size of them and try and share more loads in more volume, you'd be able to unlock far better freight. So now let's talk about the different innovations in logistics and what can we do to unlock this trapped transportation capacity. Two very innovative things that have come across the world is drones and quick e-commerce. And why are these two interesting? So in logistics, one of the predominant things to understand is that you either have an asset that is moving cargo from point A to B. And each time you do it faster and faster, you can essentially reduce your cost. So any idea or any innovative way where you can move in faster cycles, your cost per, so to speak, cargo per kilo, etc., can come down. Which is why a couple of models were tried in India where some worked, some didn't. But essentially, one of the very innovative ones, which I think will have a very interesting future, is drones. And what we can do through drones, of course, right now is still smaller parcels. majorly being used for medical kind of, facilities, those kind of movements. But essentially, every time you take a vehicle for your last mile movement, you're still carrying a whole big truck to do milk runs, which now can be completely disrupted with the drone technology. Of course, there's big scope and a lot of improvement there, but a lot of companies can look at this as a very interesting and new innovative way to really reach the last end mile customer quickly, in time, and at a very cheap cost. The second is quick e-commerce. And as you all know, in India especially, it's one of the most fastest growing sectors. And that again is for the same reason, is because they were able to reduce the turnaround time for people to come and deliver, so to speak, groceries, other kind of items that the customer needs. And if, for example, a normal delivery would take in 1 day, 2 days, sometimes now even half a day, the faster that happens, the lower your cost per, so to speak, person, logistics, XYZ comes down. And so each time it was first, 24 hours, which became 12 hours. Now it's come to almost 10 minutes. And we know some of the startups that in India have been doing phenomenally interesting work simply by making the delivery move faster. So for us as management, so to speak, leaders of the world, it's essentially important to figure out that in logistics, a couple of things are universal, right? We need to understand that as you go bigger, your cost comes lower. As you go faster, your cost comes lower. So these are kind of the universal principles which you can actually use to make sure that there are loopholes in your ecosystem, and how can they be, so to speak, covered so that you can reduce your logistics cost and also unlock this untrapped or trapped transportation capacity. That's it from my side. Thank you very much, and thank you DLC for giving us this opportunity. And from our side in the Global Supply Chain Management Committee, if you have any questions, we're happy to address them. Thank you. Have a good evening.